The word liar bleeds through my front door, the red paint still wet under my fingers. My best friend's life is already in ruins, her secrets splashed across town like gasoline. I'm next. The keychain in my palm is proof. The man leading our prayer vigil just tried to steal my bag, and he's not done yet. I swing my briefcase like a weapon, but the dirt bike's engine growls closer. 30 seconds until he reaches me. My only advantage? I know his face, and he doesn't know I've seen it. The steel wool shrieked against the wood grain, sending flecks of white paint fluttering like dead skin onto the porch. Sarah Miller leaned her weight into the stroke, knuckles white, breath hitching as the red spray paint liar dissolved into a pink smear. The chemical stench of turpentine stung her nostrils, mixing with the damp, heavy scent of approaching rain. She dropped the brush, her palms throbbing and stained a violent crimson that refused to wash away. It was barely 7 in the morning in Columbus, and the Sunday brunch crowd, the same people who would soon be nodding at her in the grocery aisle, would be driving past any minute. She couldn't let them see the word. In this neighborhood, a stained door was a stained life. Sarah wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, leaving a smudge of pink on her forehead. She looked down the cul-de-sac. Every lawn was a perfect vibrating green, manicured to the millimeter. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the rhythmic tick-tick-tick of a neighbor's malfunctioning sprinkler. She felt a familiar itch in her chest, the need to balance the ledger. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened her spreadsheet. Entry 3413. Sunday. To the neighborhood. Reason: failing to maintain the aesthetic standard of the community. She hit save. The click-clack of the keys was the only thing that made her feel grounded. By noon, the sun was a white-hot coin pressed against a gray sky. Sarah wasn't done. The Whispers in the Dark campaign had already claimed Jennifer Thompson's reputation with a leaked bank statement, and Sarah refused to be the next victim. She headed to the local skate park, where the air tasted of exhaust and cheap cigarettes. She cornered Leo, a boy whose oversized hoodie swallowed his thin frame. He kicked his board up, the wood clacking against the pavement with a sharp, echoing crack. "Whatever you heard, Leo, I need a name," Sarah said, her voice holding a jagged edge. She stood close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. Leo spat a glob of gum into the dirt. "People talk, Mrs. Miller. Doesn't mean they're talking to me." He wouldn't meet her eyes, instead picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "Someone climbed my fence at 3 in the morning. Sarah pressed, her eyes scanning his face for the slightest twitch of a muscle. "Was it Marcus? I know he's been angry since the school board meeting." Leo shrugged, his shoulders hunching toward his ears in a defensive posture. "Marcus is grounded. Try the arcade, or maybe ask your own husband where he goes at night." The comment bit deep, but Sarah didn't let her expression flicker. She moved from the park to the Starbucks on 5th, then to the library parking lot, interrogating every teenager who looked like they had too much time and too much resentment. She used her counselor voice, the one that sounded like warm honey but hit a steel hook. She asked about the spray paint, about the letters, about the way the town felt like it was breathing through a straw. By the time the streetlights flickered on at their premature 3 p.m. start, she had a list of names, but no smoking gun. The town felt like a coiled spring, and she was the only one trying to keep it from snapping. 2 hours later, Sarah stood behind a rusted dumpster in the alley behind the Sun-Times building. The shadows stretched long and thin, smelling of sour milk and wet cardboard. The brickwork was cold against her back, the grit of the city seeping into her coat. Robert Evans leaned against the opposite wall, the glowing ember of his cigarette illuminating the deep creases around his mouth. He exhaled a cloud of gray smoke that swirled around his head like a ghost. "You're late," Robert muttered, flicking ash onto a discarded newspaper. He tapped the glass of his watch. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythmic sound that set Sarah's teeth on edge. "The kids are tight-lipped," Sarah said, pressing a manila envelope against her chest. "They know something is coming, Robert. The air feels heavy. This town feeds on secrets, Sarah." Robert reached out, his fingers rough like sandpaper as he took the envelope. "You're trying to fix a dam that's already burst. Jennifer's bank statements were just the leak. The flood is coming." "I can stop it," Sarah insisted, though her voice wavered. "I have the logs. I have the patterns." Robert let out a dry, hacking laugh. "You have a spreadsheet. The person behind whispers has a knife." He tucked the envelope into his coat. "I'll look into the council vote, but stay off the main roads tonight. People are starting to look at you like you're the one holding the match." As Robert retreated into the dark, the heavy silence of the alley swallowed his footsteps. Sarah turned to head toward her car, her heart drumming a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The alley was a throat, and she was being swallowed. The sound came first, a high-pitched whine that grew into a guttural roar. A dirt bike drifted around the corner of the alley, its headlight a blinding, singular eye that pinned Sarah against the brick. The rider was a silhouette in black, a plastic mask obscuring their face. Sarah's instinct to flee was overridden by a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. She wasn't a victim. She was a fixer. The bike lunged. The rider reached out, fingers clawing for the strap of her leather bag. "No!" Sarah screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. Instead of letting go, she swung her heavy briefcase with both hands. It was a solid weight, packed with her laptop and thick files. The corner of the case caught the rider in the chest with a sickening thud. The bike wobbled, the tires screeching as they fought for traction on the oily asphalt. The rider grunted, a muffled sound of pain, and swerved hard to avoid a stack of wooden pallets. For a second, Sarah and the attacker were inches apart. She reached out, her fingers catching on the rough fabric of the rider's jacket. She gripped a metal object, pulling with everything she had as the bike roared and sped away, the exhaust stinging her eyes. She stood alone in the dark, gasping for air, her lungs burning. Her hand was closed tight. When she opened it, a heavy silver keychain sat in her palm. It was a high-end piece, a miniature silver cross intertwined with a stylized M. It smelled of expensive cologne and church incense. Sarah's knees went weak. She knew this object. She had seen it a dozen times on the desk of the man who had counseled her through her father's departure, the man who was currently organizing the town's Prayer for Peace vigil, Pastor Michael. She whispered, the name tasting like ash. The very man who was supposed to be the moral compass of Columbus was the one trying to run her down in the dark. The realization didn't bring clarity. It brought a cold, numbing dread. She walked back to her car, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. She needed to log this. She needed to find the logic. But as she sat in the driver's seat, the scent of the incense clinging to her skin, Sarah realized the ledger wasn't just unbalanced. The book was being burned. The next morning, the high school was a tomb of white tile and cold lockers. Sarah walked the halls, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clocks vibrating in her teeth. She stopped at the trophy case. Taped to the glass, right over the championship photo of the 1994 football team, was a stark white envelope. Her name was written in elegant, flowing script. Inside, the note was simple. The pills didn't make the guilt go away, did they, Sarah? Stop digging, or the pharmacy records go to the Board of Ethics. The air in the hallway turned freezing. Her secret, the blurred months after her mother's death, the orange plastic bottles hidden in the back of the vanity, was no longer hers. She looked up at the gold-plated trophies. Every single one was headless, the jagged plastic necks pointing at her like accusing fingers. She felt the walls leaning in, the sterile smell of floor wax suddenly suffocating. She drove to the church, her hands gripping the wheel so hard the leather groaned. She needed to confront Michael. She needed him to look her in the eye and tell her why he was tearing the town apart. But when she arrived, the sanctuary was empty. The sound of the bathroom sink running in the church office, 3 distinct bursts of water, 3 distinct lathers, told her he was there. "Michael," she shouted, slamming her fist against the locked office door. "I have the keychain. I know it was you." The water stopped. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Then, the sound of a back door clicking shut. By the time Sarah ran around the building, the pastor's car was gone. She stepped into his office, the air smelling of lemon polish and old paper. In the trash can, she found it. A neighborhood map, shredded into thin ribbons. She knelt, piecing 2 scraps together. It was a map of the cul-de-sac. Her house was circled in red. Returning home was no refuge. Sarah pulled into her driveway to find her car's front tires hissed flat, the rubber sagging like melted wax. She walked into her house, the air feeling thin and wrong. In her bedroom, resting on her white silk pillow, was a dead sparrow. Its neck was snapped, its tiny, sightless eyes staring at the ceiling. There was no note this time. There didn't need to be. The message was clear. "I can get to you whenever I want." "Robert, get in the car," Sarah said into her phone an hour later, her voice flat and cold. She had borrowed David's SUV. "We're going to the park. I found something on the map." They were halfway to the park, driving down a narrow, tree-lined road, when the black SUV appeared in the rearview mirror. It didn't signal. It didn't slow down. It rammed their bumper with a jarring metal-on-metal crunch that snapped Sarah's head back. "Hold on," Robert yelled, his hands white on the dashboard. The black SUV pulled alongside them, the tinted windows reflecting the gray sky. It swerved, forcing Sarah toward the edge of the road where the pavement gave way to a steep, muddy drop-off. The engine of the other car roared, a predatory sound that drowned out Sarah's own scream. "He's going to flip us," Robert screamed. Sarah slammed on the brakes, the tires shrieking as they skidded on the wet asphalt. The black SUV shot past them, but the momentum carried Sarah's car off the shoulder. They tilted, the world spinning into a blur of green and brown. With a bone-jarring thud, the car hit the bottom of the drainage ditch, the side windows shattering into 1,000 diamonds. Silence followed, broken only by the hiss of the radiator and the distant, fading roar of the black SUV. Sarah blinked, the scent of mud and crushed grass filling her nose. She felt a trickle of warmth on her temple, blood. "Robert?" she gasped. "I'm okay," he wheezed, kicking his door open. They crawled out into the freezing muck of the ditch. The white river stones lining the trench looked like bleached teeth in the fading light. Sarah looked up at the road. They were invisible down here. "This isn't just gossip, Robert," Sarah said, wiping blood from her eye. "The whispers? They're using the town's own systems against us. The cameras, the maps, the mail." Robert leaned against the wrecked car, tapping his watch glass with a frantic, uneven rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. I found something before we left, Sarah. Something I didn't want to tell you. Tell me. The letters, Robert said, his voice trembling. They aren't coming through the mail. Someone is putting them directly into the boxes. High security boxes, Sarah. The kind you need a master key for. Sarah felt the world tilt. Only the postmaster has those. And the police chief. James Wilson, Robert whispered. The man who's supposed to be investigating the letters is the one delivering them. Subverted. Sarah felt a surge of grim confidence. This was it. The logical conclusion. Of course it was Wilson. He had the keys, the surveillance, the authority to move through the neighborhood unnoticed. It made perfect sense. The chief of police was the ultimate fixer turned predator. He was using the town's secrets to maintain a stranglehold on the elite, ensuring his own power was absolute. "We have to go to the station," Sarah said, her voice regaining its professional steel. "If we find the key log or the master set in his desk, we can end this. He's the head of the snake, Robert. We cut it off, and the whispers die." Robert nodded, his face pale but determined. "I have a contact. We can get into the back entrance of the station while the shift changes for the Founders' Day prep. If we're fast, we can get the evidence before the gala starts." They moved with surgical precision. They bypassed the main lobby, slipping through the side door with the practiced ease of people who had spent their lives navigating the bureaucracy of Columbus. Sarah's heart hammered a hopeful rhythm. This was the smart move. This was the play that would save her reputation and her town. They reached Wilson's office, the air smelling of stale coffee and old leather. Robert sat at the computer, his fingers flying. "I'm in. Checking the digital access logs for the master key. This is it, Sarah. We've got him." Sarah felt a wave of relief so intense it made her dizzy. The nightmare was almost over. She looked at a photo on Wilson's desk, him and his wife, smiling at a charity event. "I'm sorry, James," she thought, "but the ledger must be balanced." "Wait," Robert said, his voice dropping an octave. He stopped typing. "What is it? Did you find the log?" "Sarah, look at the timestamp on the key usage." He pointed at the screen. The master key was checked out 3 times this week. But look at the GPS signature on the chief's squad car during those times. Sarah leaned in. The map on the screen showed the squad car was miles away, at the precinct or at the courthouse, during every single delivery. "He didn't do it," Sarah whispered. "No," Robert said, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. "He didn't. But look who signed for the key on behalf of the chief's office." The name on the screen wasn't James Wilson. It was David Miller. The floor seemed to vanish. Sarah's own husband, the man who couldn't make a left turn to save his life, had been using his consulting status with the city council to access the keys. He hadn't been protecting her. He had been the one providing the delivery mechanism for the very letters that were destroying her. And by breaking into the chief's office to find this, Sarah had just tripped a silent alarm. The red lights in the hallway began to pulse. A mechanical voice spoke over the intercom. "Unauthorized access detected. Lockdown initiated. Robert, we have to go." Sarah lunged for the door, but the heavy steel bolt clicked into place. They were trapped in the chief's office, and the evidence didn't point to a villain they could fight. It pointed to the man she shared a bed with. She hadn't found the head of the snake. She had found the nest in her own cellar. The Founders' Day gala was a blur of silk and masks. Sarah had managed to talk her way out of the precinct, claiming she was looking for Wilson to report a new threat. But the seed of doubt had grown into a forest. She moved through the ballroom, the high-pitched feedback from the sound system creating a physical pressure in her ears. Everyone was wearing the silicone mask of the town's founder, a frozen, smiling face that made her stomach churn. She slipped away to the town hall library, a place of towering bookshelves and a sharp, acidic smell of rotting paper. She needed to find the laptop Robert had mentioned, a secondary backup the Whispers author used. She found it tucked behind a row of oversized encyclopedias. As she opened the lid, the screen flickered to life. It was filled with files: Jennifer_bank.pdf, Sarah_medical.doc, David_accounts.xls. Looking for something, Sarah? The voice came from the shadows of the stacks. Sarah spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. A figure stepped forward, holding a heavy brass award, the Citizen of the Year trophy. The shadow lunged. Sarah dove to the left, the brass weight whistling past her ear and smashing into a shelf, sending books flying like wounded birds. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing a thick, leather-bound reference book. "Who are you?" she hissed. The attacker didn't speak, only swung again. Sarah blocked the blow with the book, the impact vibrating through her arms and numbing her fingers. She shoved the book into the attacker's face, the rough paper scraping skin, and bolted for the door. She didn't look back until she reached the bright, chaotic lights of the ballroom. She found David near the stage. He looked magnificent in his tuxedo, his broad shoulders and athletic build drawing eyes from across the room. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did. "Sarah, where have you been?" he asked, reaching for her hand. "I know about the keys, David," she whispered. Before he could answer, the lights dimmed. The tribute video for David Miller began to play on the massive projector screen. It started with images of his buildings, the sleek glass towers that defined the new Columbus. Then, the screen flickered. The music turned into a jarring, distorted mess. The images of buildings were replaced by spreadsheets, bank statements, wire transfers to offshore accounts. The words embezzlement and fraud flashed in giant red letters. The room went silent. Then the murmurs began, a low, rising tide of anger. "David?" Sarah looked at him. He was white as a sheet, his eyes darting toward the exits. Subverted. Sarah looked around for Robert. He would know what to do. He was her ally. He was the one who had helped her get this far. She saw him standing by the press table, his camera raised. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at her. She pushed through the crowd toward him. "Robert, help me. We need to get him out of here before..." Robert didn't move. He didn't offer a hand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of glossy photos. He tossed them onto the nearest table. They were her medical records, her addiction logs, her spreadsheet of apologies. "Why?" she gasped. "You were the story, Sarah," Robert said, his voice cold and professional. He didn't even tap his watch. He was perfectly calm. "The fixer who was more broken than the town. It's a Pulitzer, Sarah. I couldn't let a hack like Wilson take the credit. We were partners. We were a lead," Robert corrected. "I leaked the video to the hacker. I leaked your records to the Sun-Times. By tomorrow morning, you and David will be the most hated people in the state." The crowd closed in. Hands grabbed at Sarah's dress. Shouts of "thief" and "liar" echoed off the high ceilings. She saw the police moving in, handcuffs gleaming in the strobe lights. They weren't going for Robert. They were going for David. Sarah stood paralyzed as they clicked the metal cuffs around her husband's wrists. He didn't fight. He just looked at the floor, his GPS-obsessed mind probably trying to find a way to turn right out of this. She was alone. The whispers hadn't just exposed the town, they had stripped her bare. Hours later, Sarah sat in a small, windowless holding room. The walls smelled of industrial cleaner and sweat. She had been questioned, then left alone while the lawyers and the police sorted through the wreckage of the Miller estate. She looked at the small monitor in the corner of the room, which was still looping the evidence video. She stared at the scanned documents, her mind clicking into its old, analytical rhythm. Entry 3414. To myself. Reason: trusting the wrong man. Then, she saw it. In the corner of one of the scanned bank statements, there was a reflection on the glass of the scanner. It was a small, holographic sticker, a cat with a lightning bolt. Sarah's breath hitched. She knew that sticker. She had seen it on a laptop at the coffee shop. Not Robert's, not David's. She manipulated the guard, a nervous young man named Matthew who collected sugar packets, into letting her review her statement on the computer. She pulled up the video, zooming in on the reflection. It wasn't a man. It was a girl. Sarah didn't wait for the lawyers. She knew the service tunnels from her work with the Historical Society. She slipped out a side door, her heart pounding, and vanished into the dark, damp artery of the city. The sound of rushing water behind the walls was a constant, heavy thrum that drowned out her fear. She emerged in the parking lot, the air thick with the smell of wet asphalt. There, sitting on a rusted shipping container, was Emily Thompson, the girl with the asymmetrical bob and the monochromatic black clothes. She was counting out loud. 104, 105. Emily? Sarah said, her voice echoing in the empty lot. The girl didn't look up. The gala is over, Sarah. Everyone is home, crying into their expensive pillows. You did it, Sarah said. Not the pastor, not the chief, you. Emily finally looked at her. Her eyes were cold, unblinking voids. My mother let me lie on the floor with a broken arm for an hour because she didn't want to ruin her party. This town is a mask, Sarah. I just took it off. You destroyed my life, Emily. You put David in prison. David put himself in prison. Emily retorted, her voice like a scalpel. I just showed everyone the blueprints, and you? You're the biggest liar of all. You think if you apologize enough, the world will stop being cruel. It won't. Sarah looked at the girl, at the pain hidden behind the black clothes and the sharp hair. She saw the 9-year-old girl whose father had left, the girl who thought she had to fix everything to be loved. You're right, Sarah said softly. I am a liar. I lied to myself that this place was worth saving. She didn't call the police. She didn't scream. She sat down on the cold pavement next to the container. What happens now, Emily? The girl hesitated, the rhythm of her counting breaking for the first time. Now we see who stays when the money is gone. A month later, Sarah Miller stood in the foyer of her house for the last time. The movers had taken everything: the mahogany table, the silk curtains, the framed degrees. The air smelled of dust and emptiness. David was in a federal facility, and the Miller name was a curse word in suburban Columbus. She picked up her canvas bag. It was light. No laptop, no spreadsheets, no logs. She moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment near the city center. It was sterile and quiet, the only sound the occasional dead fly on the windowsill. She got a job at a community center, helping people fill out housing forms and job applications. It wasn't fixing them. It was just being there. On her first day, She sat in the break room, sipping a cup of cheap coffee. Her hands were clean, no turpentine, no red paint. She looked at her phone. She hadn't opened the spreadsheet in weeks. She felt a strange, terrifying sense of peace. The veneer was gone. The perfect life was a heap of rubble in a drainage ditch. But as she watched the sun set over the gray city skyline, Sarah realized she wasn't breathing through a straw anymore. For the first time in 38 years, the ledger was at zero. And for the first time, she didn't feel the need to balance it.